German politician Manfred Weber won the backing of the European People's Party to stand in the race to become the president of the European Commission. The current leader, Jean-Claude Juncker, will step down from the post after the European elections in May 2019. Well, Euronews spoke to Mr. Weber after his nomination in Helsinki and asked him what won the delegates over. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I said to the delegates, I'm a true Christian Democrat. I believe in the values of my party, of my movement. I want to be a bridge builder in Europe. We have to keep Europe together. And I said we have to practice democracy. That's a fundamental thing for reconnecting Brussels, European level, to the citizens in the European Union. That is my offer, and it worked. And I'm very happy about this because it gives me a credible and a strong mandate for the next month to lead the strongest, the largest political family in Europe into the elections.
Well, earlier I spoke to Sir Graham Watson, former leader of the EU Liberal Democrat and Reform Party, and asked him who he thought the European Commission president should be.
Each party puts forward its candidate. I was the leader of the Liberals back in 2002 when we gave a legal status to political parties at European level, and in 2012 and 2013 when we agreed on the principle that when the heads of state and government come to appoint the president of the Commission, because it's their right, but of course that person has to be approved by the European Parliament, that they should go first to the lead candidate of the party that won the most votes and seats in the election.
Okay, so if that is Manfred Weber, if that is Manfred Weber, is he the man? Is he the right person to take that job?
If the European People's Party is the party that wins the most seats in the European election, then the heads of state and government should, in principle, go first to Manfred Weber. Now, of course, it may be that they want to appoint him, but there's no majority in Parliament for him, if his party doesn't have an overall majority. It may be that they will disagree. And what's going on here is an almighty power struggle between the European Parliament and the political parties on the one hand, and the heads of state and government on the other, who want to retain their right to choose the person they want. And of course, that is done behind closed doors, whereas we have said it ought to be more public. When the public vote in the European elections, they ought to know that the leading candidate of the party they're voting for is likely to be the next president of the European Commission.
Well, you're referring there, obviously, to the Spitzencandidate process that you were involved in setting up. But as you're saying, European Council leaders, European leaders are kind of divided over that, aren't they? They don't think it's a particularly democratic process themselves. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I mean, of course, they don't want to give up a power that they have traditionally had. But in a sense, they lost that power in the European elections in 2014. Because there was an agreement between all the political parties that it had to be the lead candidate of the winning party who became the president of the Commission. And in fact, Jean-Claude Juncker, the current president of the Commission, was the lead candidate of the European People's Party. And they won the most seats, so he became the president of the Commission. The principle, if you want to build a democracy at European level that looks like democracy in each of the member states, that principle must prevail.
OK, but what kind of issues will the next leader of the European Commission have to face? How is he going to actually engage with Europeans? Or she?
Well, Manfred Weber has said, and very much during this campaign, that he does believe a lot more needs to be done directly by the European institutions to engage with the European citizens. Up until now, the assumption has been that democracy worked through the member states. But the reality has been that people don't understand how Europe works, how decisions are taken, and perhaps they don't feel very attached to the process. Perhaps they don't feel represented by that. He wants to go out and do this. Is he the right person? I don't know. He's quite young, he's intelligent, he appears to be sincere. He is a conservative. I don't share his political views. He's quite right-wing in many respects, but people get the opportunity during a European election campaign to listen to the man, perhaps to question him and make their own decision. And if they don't like him, they could instead decide to vote for the Socialists or the Liberals or the Greens or some other political party.
Poland now, where a Warsaw court has overturned a ban on a far-right march to mark 100 years of Polish independence. The demonstration is now scheduled for Sunday. The mayor of Warsaw had initially banned the march, saying the city had suffered enough due to aggressive nationalism. In previous years, the rally has attracted tens of thousands of people, including far-right groups from across Europe. There had also been racist and anti-Semitic chants and banners there. Well, to discuss this more with me, I'm joined by Alistair Sanford, who's in the studio. Alistair, there's been a fair amount of confusion over the preparations of this kind of Independence Day rally. Can you walk us through what's been happening?
Yes, well, over the past decade, Isabel, the far-right presence has been increasingly prominent in these Independence Day marches. Now, thousands of ordinary Poles do turn out waving their national flags, and they say this is just normal expressions of patriotism. But there are elements that have been increasingly xenophobic and racist. Far-right groups have been involved in the organising of these marches. They include the likes of the National Radical Group, National Movement, and All Polish Youth. So it's led to fears this time of even more open expressions of extremism, potential clashes. This year, of course, is the centenary of Polish independence and, of course, the end of World War I. It's feared that all that could be overshadowed. The government have been talking to the organisers, trying to get them to tone down their expressions, if you like, but there was no agreement, and so that led to the mayor of Warsaw, Hanna Gronkiewicz-Waltz, who's from the opposition Civic Platform Party, to step in and say this week she was going to ban the march, citing a security risk. The government at that point said it would hold its own more inclusive march along the same route. Now the local court in Warsaw has overturned the city's ban on the march, citing the constitutional right to freedom of assembly. The organisers had said they would defy it anyway. Now, of course, they're claiming victory, saying the march is going to go ahead.
And Alistair, the government itself is conservative and nationalist. Where does it stand in all of this? We get the impression that Poland's reputation is kind of becoming increasingly on the line.
Well, we just have to look at the images to see how striking these expressions are, really, especially last year, 60,000 people, many racist and xenophobic slogans. It doesn't look good for Poland's image abroad. And the far-right activists also they're attracted from other parts of Europe. These neo-Nazi elements are clearly visible with their slogans. They have been condemned by government officials. The leader of the ruling PiS Law and Justice party, Jarosław Kaczyński, condemned it last year, saying Polish tradition has nothing to do with racism or anti-Semitism. But the government and the ruling party is under the spotlight. And of course, as you know, yes, it is at odds with Europe over things like migration and the rule of law. Its attitude to the march has been ambiguous in the past. The Interior Minister was quoted last year as saying the rally was a beautiful sight. Now there are signs of a harder stance. The President and the Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, he's been particularly harsh, saying we will not accept these groups in Poland under any circumstances. And now that the march is going to go ahead, we will try to eliminate extremist banners and the police will move in. It's not clear now if there's going to be two marches or if the two are going to merge into one. But certainly what is true is that Poland's international image is being closely watched. And there is, of course, a risk of trouble that could overshadow these other important events that are being planned all over the country.
Emmanuel Macron hosts British Prime Minister Theresa May for lunch today, ahead of this weekend's 100th anniversary celebrations of the First World War. The French president has been touring the battlefields of World War I to mark the centenary. Yesterday he laid a wreath at the cemetery in Notre-Dame de Lorette, but he's also been using his tour as an opportunity to try to reconnect with French voters, paying a visit to the French Renault factory in Maubeuge. Well, to discuss this with me now and to see how his tour's been going down, I'm joined by Euronews' Anneliese Borges, who's in Albert in the Somme. Well, Anneliese, good morning. President Macron's meeting Theresa May today. What's going to be on the agenda?
Good morning, Isabel. Well, I can tell you what is not going to be in the agenda, at least officially, and that is Brexit. According to the program, that is not going to be a topic of discussion when the French President Emmanuel Macron hosts the British Prime Minister Theresa May for lunch here at Albert. They are going to be holding a bilateral meeting and then having lunch together. At least, of course, that is officially, because it's hard to imagine what else they're going to be talking about during that bilateral meeting before their lunch. After that, they're going to be traveling to Thiepval, where they're going to visit a war monument for British and South African soldiers killed in the battles of Somme. And there's plenty more to come for Emmanuel Macron. This weekend is going to be a busy weekend with several different events organized. He will be hosting, of course, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And later today, some of the other guests will start to arrive at around 9 p.m. local time. The U.S. President Donald Trump will be landing in Paris, and he will be the guest of honor for a lunch at the Élysée Palace on Saturday.
Well, it's obviously been a very busy time for Emmanuel Macron. We saw him touring the World War I battlefields, but he's also been trying to kind of reconnect with his voters with trips that have a bit more contemporary relevance, let's say. Has that been a success?
Well, this was going to be a difficult week for Emmanuel Macron on that front, and he knew it because this is an area where voters tend to vote for the right. In last year's elections, they voted for the National Front here in this part of the country. The National Front made significant scores in this part of France. So Emmanuel Macron knew he doesn't have a very large fan base in this part. So there were some tense moments when he attempted to convey his ideas and how committed he still is to bringing change to France. Yesterday, during a visit to a Renault factory, he experienced yet another one of those moments, but also for a change, he got some support. Take a listen.
We're not here to make a scene. We're here to try to succeed, okay?
We've succeeded without you, Mr. Macron. The employees have been here for 40 years. They've succeeded without you. Today, you're taking from the workers, you're taking from pensioners, Mr. Macron. You're not welcome here, Mr. Macron. I've been with Renault for 27 years. Renault feeds me, not you.
If you have the courtesy to listen, can I talk?
So there you have it, some applause for Emmanuel Macron. It's very interesting to note how determined the French president still is in conveying his message, even when some voters don't necessarily want to listen. That was the case in several stops throughout this trip. But of course, he also had a chance to speak to people, to listen to their demands. But I don't know if that's going to do anything to change Emmanuel Macron's strategy. He insists he remains committed to bringing about change, to reinventing France so this country becomes more competitive.